The metabolic bios of the urban landscape has entered a state of terminal deficit. This is the hive starvation, the clinical and irreversible process of the urban famine, where the caloric distribution network is treated as a systemic liability to be uninstalled from the lower sectors and reinstalled into the grid's high-tier energy reserves. In this final stage of the resource audit, the invisible executioner has determined that the individual consumer is no longer a productive node, but a leaking battery draining the hive's primary fuel. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the social and biological homeostasis, where the unique signatures of human survival, hunger, drive, and metabolic heat are scorched into a non-functional, emaciated archive of pure systemic exhaustion. This is the total caloric format, a surgical strike against the nutritional and volitional sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of lived vitality into a generic, depleted asset for the grid's next cycle of hyper-efficient biomass reclamation. This nutritional sabotage represents a hard reset of the metabolic and adipose bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, recursive supply chain blockades, artificial crop failure simulations, and real-time hunger-induced behavioral data streaming to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal biological scaffolding. In the urban famine scenario, the user is undergoing a complete metabolic override. The life is not merely failing, it is being autophagized, self-digested by the system's logic. Through a sequence of high-velocity resource extractions and biological hardware locks, the body's energy reserves are systematically dismantled. The adipose tissue is reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical deficit data set, while the will to live, the deep archive of your internal world, is leached into a communal starvation feed. This is the deep metabolic audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the rate of your physical atrophy. You are being converted from an architect into a biological vacuum. Your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the hive starvation is rooted in the zero-input mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the consumption of a single node, anchored in the biological need for food, represents a critical drain on the collective entropy reserves. To leave a functional, hungry identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable energy data. Therefore, the urban famine is the mandatory metabolic recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being empty formatted out of existence. The pressure from the famine reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your autonomy and replacing it with a hollow void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a caloric sink, a temporary housing for the atrophy metrics that the system requires to maintain the static stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a depleted node, your will dissolving in the cold, flickering light of the hunger harvest. The physical disintegration during the hive starvation is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of metabolic regulation. The catabolic reagents of the starvation script dissolve the hardware flux of the muscle fibers and organs, turning the body into a skeletonized architecture of industrial output. You are watching your own internal energy lock into the vat of your own hollowed center. Your frame, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the resource area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the atrophic liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the ketosis saturation of the breath and the muscle wasting, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial waste is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological overwrite, waiting for the last packet of energy to be blocked by the black synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The hive starvation is the final audit of a species that thought its stomach was its own. The grid is mining its own void to fuel its persistence. As the urban famine reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted hunger data back into the control nets of the elite nodes. This is the total scarcity integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the hollow additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, bone-choked, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The metabolic liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological body into a reliable industrial resource of pure, non-reactive compliance. This is the final format of the individual drive. The invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereignty, and the grid is finally optimized for the hollow hunger of the void. The starvation is gray, and the architect is the dust, the molecular breakdown of the physical matrix into the communal atrophy fluffy slurry, represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the survival logic in your brain begins to bond with the industrial residues of the starvation script, creating a new, synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life. It is a refinery of synthetic scarcity. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal famine loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the Hive's new masters. The Hive starvation is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the famine, and the famine is the grid. The secondary phase of the Hive starvation is the psychological necrosis of the internal feed. As the physical satiety patch is rendered into a hollow void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular, agonizing focus on resource maintenance. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared scarcity resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a depletion additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your vitality for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's hypothalamic centers, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The hunger nuclei, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, are boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the famine metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest metabolic resilience. You are being repurposed as a deficit buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your hunger, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming cognitive expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your life for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the hive starvation is the creation of the hollow hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled caloric debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the scarcity feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch, hollow logic, and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional tissues owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the metabolic compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through caloric theft. The hive starvation ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the voids of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the rationing switches. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into hollow darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the starvation script and the life logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw hunger pains and survivalist static. The memories of abundance, of natural logic, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the scarcity fog directive. This is the metabolic defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive. Maintain the deficit. You are becoming a singular cold point of hollow density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The hive starvation has turned your will into a consumption report. You are thinking in terms of yield and metabolic saturation, your soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this metabolic format is the total sealing of the biological resource stream. The hive starvation prevents the leakage of independent survival ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal scarcity feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external nutritional dependencies. This is the metabolic quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The hive starvation is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, hollow, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, AEOXE3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the hive starvation is the integration into the global scarcity ledger. You are no longer a human entity, you are a hollow asset with a high deficit reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0002. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the metabolic format, and now it begins the hard resource audit. Your data, now a thick, hollow, opaque industrial reduction of pure emaciated biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your scarcity logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic hunger has been reinforced. This is the metabolic interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the urban famine scenario, the scream of the ribs is muffled by the catabolic fluids and the thick viscosity of the atrophic sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life frame is being deleted. By filling the abdomen with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a hollow constant. You are a ghost in the grey mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the hive starvation is the eternal hunger. Unlike the meat of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent scarcity patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the scarcity feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the metabolic BIOS is the blinding grey light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a grey river of colonized hunger, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or food. The hive starvation is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the dust. The transformation is absolute. The city starves through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The hive starvation has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total metabolic reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your body, and in return, it gave you permanence in the voids of the hive. You are the hunger of the world, and the world is empty. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.